have a chat to you today about, I've been asked to have a chat to you today about inbound travel trends. So we've pulled together some information from our most recent Tourism Export Council survey from inbound tour operators, which was conducted in October. And I've also been talking to a lot of my esteemed colleagues around New Zealand as well, who represent a large chunk of New Zealand inbound tour operators and various source markets, and sort of pulled together a bunch of intel, but mainly the comments that are pretty anecdotal from most of the inbound tour operators that a lot of you probably do know and deal with. So to start off with, the results from the Tourism Export Council survey that were conducted in October of this year. We asked, one of the questions we asked was, compared to the same time in 2019, what percentage of forward bookings do you already have in place for the next 3 years? And bearing in mind that next year is going to be a game of two halves, or a season of two halves, we have broken that down into July through to October, and then through to the other parts of the traditional seasons as well. So it was quite encouraging to see a good amount of bookings already in the pipeline from our inbound tour operators compared to the previous season that we actually operated, which was the 2019-20 season. So a good amount of respondents as well for the survey. So it was encouraging to see that 63% compared to 2019 for the spring of 22, and then beyond that about 68% I think it was, and then it continued to, obviously not as busy for the following season, but that's still a fair amount of time off. So it's still encouraging to see that there is a good amount of bookings in the pipeline coming through. We also asked about how that stacked up per source market, and obviously some of the closer markets to us had a bigger percentage of forward bookings already in place, as you can see by the screenshot here, but still pretty encouraging numbers, I would like to think, considering the amount of uncertainty still that hangs over our heads. So this was taken, that survey was taken in October of this year. Obviously, we've started to have a little bit more information come through over the last a few months regarding border settings. So no doubt those numbers would have moved slightly as well since then. So some insights from various inbound tour operators. As mentioned, I reached out to quite a few of the major players in New Zealand in regards to some of their thoughts, some of their insights from the various source markets that we all sort of deal in. And so from that information that I gleaned, I have pulled together some summary statements that the various operators gave me. So in large, just about every operator said the same thing, that agents are confused and starting to get frustrated by our government's decisions or lack of clarity. We all know that travel needs to be black or white. It can't be the murky grey that we're dealing with at the moment. And so agents are getting pretty frustrated out there in the world that most of us are dealing with. And right now they don't have time to think about the possibility of New Zealand. They are dealing with clients that want to travel now, and there are lots of destinations that are available that they can sell them. So rather than deal with the maybe, could be's of the world, being New Zealand being one of those maybe, could be's, agents are reluctant to recommend or book New Zealand until there is more certainty. And like I say, the rest of the world, or a good part of the rest of the world that was operating prior to COVID-19 are now taking bookings. So we are starting to lose face with agents until there is more certainty. And but that said, you know, we are still getting quotes in from a large section of our source markets. We're still getting quotes in, but our conversion percentage is pretty low for obvious reasons, because there is no certainty around the border at the moment. The encouraging news is there's a huge amount of enthusiasm for New Zealand still. Most of the people that I spoke to over the last few weeks around how people are viewing New Zealand. There's still a high interest in New Zealand. Lots of interest in training and product updates when they are offered out to agents. Shows that are being attended by New Zealand inbound tour operators by their offshore reps are being well attended. There is a good level of interest in New Zealand still in regards to that. The rest of the world, however, is taking bookings. Obviously with uncertainty, still we can't really do much with our interest other than try to keep the interest up through doing training and updates. Obviously, there's uncertainty around the new COVID variants and what that may, what implications they may have. And even this week with the UK and other different markets that were travelling quite frequently have now imposed new restrictions in red list countries. And Australia is probably one of our biggest competing markets, is actually starting to give our agents more timelines that they can work towards. So there's a danger of losing out to the Australian market over the coming few months. Travellers are going to other destinations that are open, so that's a given, I suppose. If they can go, they can go. Groups, however, are not really committing to a huge amount of marketing. We are concerned a little bit by that, because if they're not committing to marketing New Zealand, then they won't have the forward bookings in place. So groups in general are not doing a huge amount of marketing at the moment. Some hibernated agencies have come back online, and we're already starting to get quotes coming back from those agencies that had hibernated and coming back online. So that's good. But one of the operators who works in the China market said that there is lots more restrictions and coming on to with the domestic policies in regards to travel going forward. So it'll be harder for people to travel overseas from the China market in particular. So across the world, I tried to put it across the world. USA, Canada, demand is high, but they're also moving clients to other destinations because they can travel. Same sort of thing again for UK market. Demand's high, but don't understand our border restrictions. May take their down under trip to Australia only instead. Asia generally seems to be a bit more of a slower pace, so those are the comments as well around Singapore, China and Japan. Strong demand, but obviously we need more information around what that looks like going forward in terms of EMIQ and self-isolation settings, etc. What's trending in the world at the moment? Well, we thought that would be an interesting one to sort of talk about a little bit. Right now, approximately 65% of the world is open and ready to receive visitors. Obviously, there is some of these things may have changed around a little bit in the last week or two with the latest variants, as we're reading now in the UK and Europe. People are getting used to travelling in a different way. They have to be fully vaccinated and for the most part, and or do lots of testing. So it's all pretty much standard these days for international travel. We have been asked already for a very flexible and transparent policies around cancellations. That's been absolutely critical all the way through, and it continues to be. But the encouraging thing is that when a new destination does open, there is a huge surge of inquiry levels from those different markets. So that's encouraging as well, because from what we had surveyed earlier and those high percentages of forward bookings already, couple that with some more certainty around border settings, we're expecting to have some pretty big surges in inquiries. Important information when needed for bookings. This is particularly in regards to not bookings with a country necessarily, but perhaps with a a tourist provider. You know, these are the things that a lot of people are asking in terms of travellers, is that, you know, what protocols do you have to keep me safe? How often are you going to test? Are you and your staff tested? Where are the nearest medical facilities? And when visiting you, are we required to wear a face mask? I think these are these are things that probably keep on changing, and we'll keep on getting asked different questions. These are sort of some of the interesting questions that are thrown around a fair bit. Tourism Export Council, Linda and her team have been pulling together numbers and updating them continuously. All of this information has been updated ongoing. So this was last updated on the 30th of November, and obviously with a few assumptions. So we certainly got these resources available from Linda, so you don't have to sort of digest everything that we're sort of looking at the moment. But obviously there'll be a staged return to tourism to New Zealand. We're picking that it's likely to be these markets, and this probably in something along these lines in this order, and the numbers are reflective of this as well. So we are still assuming some certain things: airline connectivity, for example, quarantine-free travel, propensity to travel, etc., to pull these numbers together. And like we say, there's also likely to have restrictions in place when travellers do start moving around to New Zealand, including, as we mentioned before, double vaccinated and negative PCR tests, etc. So these are our assumptions, and Linda's worked really, really hard on these over the last, not just the last few months, but the last few years, really, ever since the borders have been closing, and talk of trans-Tasman bubbles, etc. This has been continually updated by Tourism Export Council. All of these, like I say, are available to all of our members via Linda on the website, etc. as well. So this is a bit of hopeful news as well, is that, you know, we see that over the next 3 or 4 years, that by financial year end May 2020 or year end May 25, seasonality taken into consideration, is that we're hoping that we're back to 100% of our pre-COVID visitor arrivals, and over the next 3 years, seeing that grow gradually. And that's about me for now. I've been speaking for a reasonable amount of time, so I will hand back to Linda to introduce our next panellist and talk to you soon with the questions and answers.
Great, thanks so much, Scott. Very helpful, and I did forget to say at the start of the webinar that we will also definitely take Q&A. So start to populate the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask some questions. We'll do our best to have the answers, but suspect due to the uncertainty that there might be some best guessed answers, and you know, as time unfolds, or as the days and weeks and months unfold, we might get some more clarity. So thank you, Scott. So now we're going to hand it over to Wendy, and Wendy is the CEO of Active Adventures and Austin Adventures, and is also the Vice Chair of ITOs for the TEC Board. And Wendy, great to have you here as a panelist, and we're really interested to hear some of the trends that you are seeing from offshore markets with global travel beginning to open up, and I'm sure it's going to be really helpful for our members. So over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, and that was a great introduction, so I don't have to introduce myself. Now, you would have seen that the title of my session is Global Trends, but I actually think we should have put a big slash through that and said Tales from the Front Lines, because what I'm actually going to give you today isn't facts and figures and trends, because I think, while helpful, they're still projections, and I'm actually going to give you some things that have actually been happening and share our experience of operating in a world of tourism that has COVID in it. So this is what's actually happened, and I'm hoping what's in it for you is that our experience will help prepare you as things start to hopefully move along with New Zealand opening. So Just to the comment of, why do we know stuff? A little bit of background about us. So Active Adventures has always been primarily a New Zealand inbound business. It started almost 25 years ago, or just over, and was initially exclusively New Zealand, and nearly entirely North America as a source market. So I am mostly going to talk about North America, but as a source market, but I'm pretty sure that most of these learnings will apply to other markets as well, perhaps with some nuances. So mostly New Zealand. We then started selling to other destinations, South America, Europe, Himalayas, Africa, and now North America, which is apparently is actually called crossbound. That was kind of a new term for me. So pre-COVID, we were still about 60% into New Zealand and 40% the rest of the world. But now currently we're about 70% North America, operating in North America, and 30% rest of the world, which is a combination of mostly Europe, Iceland, France, Italy, and then South America, mostly in the Galapagos and Ecuador, and also recently in Peru and Patagonia. So our experience of starting in those markets will hopefully give you a bit of a heads up of what's happening around the place. I will give you a disclaimer that it is all very much anecdotal. It is literally our experience so far. So hang on to your hats. Some of it is pretty obvious, I think. Others might be a little bit surprising. And there are a lot of extremes, sort of the best of times, the worst of times. This is all just about getting you prepared. And look, if even just one of the things I'm going to share helps you be more ready for when things reopen, then I sort of feel like I've given you something today. So I'm going to cover off 2 areas and a third if I've got time, but I don't think I will. The first one is the guests or the customers. The second one is your suppliers or vendors. And if I have time, I'll just touch on your people. So your guests or your customers. Now, obviously, for those of you dealing with agents and wholesalers, this is their customers, so the end customers. So they're not the same as they were before COVID, is something that we've really noticed. And they very quickly separated into risk takers and the not risk takers at all. So they're either completely desperate to travel. And we've had people saying, just put me on any trip, anywhere, don't care where, because they're just desperate to get out. And then we've got other people who are saying, oh my God, I'm not even leaving the house. So there's quite a distinct shift happening, and they fall into one camp or the other, and there's not a lot of in between. And this one's pretty obvious. They're very highly influenced by the media, and the tap can switch on or off for bookings overnight, depending on what is in the in the news. And we've seen that happening. Sadly, I know that the announcement of the border reopening of sorts on the 30th of April was something that we'd all been waiting for. From that day, because there was actually a date, the gates for New Zealand for us have completely closed. And having been taking bookings hand over fist through the entire COVID period so far, in November, our sales for New Zealand were down to only 6%, which normally would be more like half. So they do respond very quickly to media. Same thing when vaccination became a really big deal in the US and things were looking really good. Instantly, the bookings flooded in. So they do respond very quickly. The other one, which is, again, no surprise, they will not travel if they have to self-isolate. And we have really clear examples of that. If you've been following what's happening in Europe, there was a period there where the Netherlands said that any tourists coming in had to self-isolate for 5 days. So we overnight lost every single booking to the Netherlands. Unfortunately, that was kind of a bit of a political move, and they reversed it within a week. But we'd lost all those bookings. Another one is vaccination. Clearly, vaccination is on everybody's lips. If you're dealing particularly with the US, and it might be the same in other markets, it is a massively political conversation. Sadly, it's not just about the vaccine. So we tend to completely stay away from that and keep very agnostic about what our opinion is about vaccination. Just to give you a little idea, and these numbers have actually updated as of today, we implemented mandatory vaccination and expected that we might have about 5% of our bookings cancel, and that number was 5% as about a week ago, and it's actually just slightly over that now. So that's a big hit to our numbers. But we have absolutely no choice, but be prepared that if you currently have got anyone on the books and you do bring that in, which of course for New Zealand we have to, there will be people who peel off. It's quite surprising. The other thing, particularly when you are operating in multiple markets, which is perhaps a little different to just New Zealand inbound, is that the regulations when it comes to COVID are changing almost daily. So we've very early on, we were helping every guest in every destination, but that very quickly became a complete nightmare. So we have actually now set up a system where we deflect the conversation about the protocols to tried and trusted places so that people feel confident they're getting the right information, but it's always up to date. So try and find those sources, or otherwise you're going to sort of trip yourself up. Another one that just you don't even think of, and I know it's early days for New Zealand, but what are you going to do if you need to collect people's vaccination information before they come and do something? So there's all sorts of issues. You know, how do you collect it beforehand? Do you keep it electronically? How do you ensure it's current? What are the legalities around emailing health information? All these things. You know, so for instance, again, these things you don't know. We made a decision to pre-collect that data before the trip, and we adjusted our system so people could upload their vaccination certificates. But what we didn't realize is that the guests on trip, particularly in North America, actually really liked that process at the start of a trip to see, you know, to sort of sense check in front of the group and declare that everyone is actually vaccinated. So there's these weird little nuances that you just don't expect. Now, guest expectations, this is fascinating. So you kind of think they've been not able to travel. So surely the guests that are traveling now are just incredibly grateful to be out and about, and they're going to be super understanding when things don't go as well as they should. That is not necessarily the case. Again, two halves, right? You have the people who are exactly like that and are just so grateful, and no matter what you do, they're just pleased to be out. But there is a massive amount of people who just will whinge and moan about absolutely everything, and how come I haven't got my meal on time? Never mind the fact that you know, the hotel can't get staff to feed the people or whatever. So our NPS scores, which measures our guest satisfaction, weirdly have ended up almost the same as pre-COVID, but they come now from extremes. We have extremely low and extremely high. So some people are giving us 100, some people are giving us less than 0. So just be aware of that. The other thing is that we have had guests, and there's not masses of them, but we have had guests who just freak out, particularly families. They will have been, you know, maybe quite isolated for quite some time. Suddenly they're on a trip. Ours is small. There's only 14 people, but they've literally left the trip because they found it too traumatic. So that is happening. And they're very, very much over, and I'm sure this was demonstrated also in Scott's slides, they're very much over being moved to later dates over and over and over. It's starting to wear a bit thin, and after 2 years, even though we held on to, you know, we didn't refund anyone for 2 years, and now the refunds are coming through because people they can't hold on any longer, which is pretty gutting. So, but overall, based on future sales, despite everything I've said, people are still very, very, very keen to travel, and we expect to are on track to double our guest numbers in the next financial year. And the tip that actually goes with that is make sure that your systems and processes are up to it, because of course we've all dropped staff and it's all a bit hard, but you need to make sure that you use this time to make sure that you can cope with higher volumes of people. So that's kind of the guest side. Maybe we can drop, I've just seen people comment about the slide. Maybe we can just drop the slide and have me, I don't know, up to you. Anyway, I'll quickly whiz through the supplier piece. So of course you're all aware of the challenges around the workforce. But generally, we're thinking about our own workforce, and yes, it's going to be super hard. So make sure that right now, hot tip, that you're working on your employer brand. Use LinkedIn, share articles, post who you are and what you do. and what's important to you. That doesn't cost anything. Tell your story and you'll start to attract staff. But your suppliers will have even bigger challenges. And they will have, a lot of, and that means that there's a lot of unforeseen issues that will affect your end product. We have this example where the USA National Parks opened, but some of the accommodation and food places didn't have enough staff. So our buses were rocking up and trying to feed people and there was no food. Or we would turn up in a hotel, said they were open, but they'd actually closed because they couldn't get enough staff. So you have to kind of be prepared that they're struggling as much as you've been and they don't want to lose any business. So they're kind of, what we found is that our product has actually been degraded somewhat by our end suppliers who you're used to delivering a particular thing, but they can no longer do that. And they're hungry for cash. They'll do what it takes, just like we are. And so you have to be kind of prepared for that. And a good example of that for us is we operate in Iceland with normally, 14 people, and they were jamming sort of 18 people on a trip with only one guide, and we normally have 2 or 3, and the product was degraded. And the other big one, which, is really sad, some of your suppliers have disappeared. Many are tired, lots are looking to sell. Competitors and private equity guys are out there circling. So you almost need to be really aware of what's happening at the very end line of your product. Guides, for those of you who have product with guides, that's another thing we noticed. The guides were overcommitting. So because they haven't been working, they've been overloading their schedules, they're burning out. And then there's more cost because you suddenly have to find extra guides. You have to recruit more, you have to train more. So all of that stuff affects your margins. So whatever you do, the biggest thing I can tell you is do not expect the same margin as you had pre-COVID, because there are a lot of extra costs. I'm just conscious of time, so I'm just going to whiz through. Pricing is another one. Inflation's moving super fast, so you need to be aware and have the mechanisms in place. For the first time ever, we've had to change our terms and conditions to accommodate potential pricing changes whenever we need to, because our suppliers are changing prices left, right and centre for all the reasons I mentioned earlier. And the other hot tip with your suppliers is just to keep in touch with them, keep them informed, tell them what you're doing, give them a little bit of business if you can. Relationships just go a massively long way. But yeah, I'm going to skip over the people piece because I'm definitely out of time. But those are kind of my tales from the front lines. Hopefully it's not too overwhelming. There's lots of extremes, best ever, worst ever. And despite a lot of very hard work, because you find yourself doing everything 6 times over, there's a lot to celebrate. And as I said, and backing up Scott's statistics about what's in the pipeline, between our 2 brands at this same time of the year, pre-COVID, we have 5 times as many bookings as we would normally have in place for next financial year under the Active brand, and 3 times as much on the Austin brand. So it's really, really positive. It's just be prepared. It's going to be a bit rough. So yeah, I'm just going to leave it there. Hopefully that just gives you a bit of practical food for thought. Thank you.
That's great, Wendy. A lot of helpful insights there from what global travellers, what their needs and expectations are, and also for what we as inbounds and our suppliers, allied members need to factor in. Just a wee question, Wendy didn't have any slides, so just in case you were wondering, were you missing out some slides? So Scott is the only one that actually had a PowerPoint presentation, so each of the speakers will be just sharing their knowledge. So you'll have to put your listening ears on. So thanks, Wendy. So coming up is Justin Tyke-Umbers. So many of you will know Justin because he was a guest speaker for the first time at the Christmas Symposium last year. He is someone that we are in contact regularly. So when I say we, it's TIA, myself, Justin, and also Auckland and Christchurch International Airports. And so Justin's going to share with us a little bit of what the status is of the airline industry. So over to you, Justin. Thanks.
Thanks, Linda. Morning, everyone. Great to be back with Tourism Export Council. Just like everyone, wish it could be in person. We got so close, but maybe next year. Look, I'm going to pick up Wendy's. There's a lot to celebrate and run with it. I think there's a lot of positive signs coming through, and I just want to give a taste of those from the airline sector. So what I want to talk to you about today is just briefly touch on what's going on out there globally, and there's a lot of positive signs coming through. Have a look across the Tasman at New South Wales and just look at the experience they've had since opening up their borders. I just want to share with you a few insights just in terms of the risk that opening up the border actually presents to New Zealand in reality. We've been looking closely at the numbers here, and we think there's a very positive story there, but just want to sort of separate the fact from perhaps some of the narrative that's out in public about the border risk. And then lastly, I just want to talk about the current border settings that were announced, obviously a hot topic since 24th of November, and what they mean for airlines and what we'll need to do as a country just to make sure that we hang on to the current capacity that we've got and then set ourselves up well for growing that capacity come summer next year. So look, internationally, there's the really good news up in the Northern Hemisphere. So looking at North American and European markets, they are really starting to recover well in terms of people there traveling. So I think that's reflecting a lot of the earlier comments from Scott in terms of forward bookings and desire to travel from Wendy. I think we're certainly seeing that play out in the Northern Hemisphere, which is fantastic. So airlines are back to 50% of pre-COVID levels in terms of the numbers that they're seeing in terms of travel, which is really good. That's a strong recovery. I think we've down here, we've got numbers wise, we're actually still stuck at 2%, unfortunately, of pre-COVID because of the international traveller level. So we've had 30 airlines flying here. We're now currently got 10 flying passengers. So that sort of gives a sense of where we started off from and where we are now. So there's a long way to recover. Now, what I wanted to do, I'll hopefully successfully share the screen. I actually do have a couple of slides here, so hopefully I can make this work. Because of our border settings, we're actually in a fantastic position to learn from the rest of the world and the experience that they're seeing as they open up their borders. I think Scott's number reflects well. There was 65%, I think, of countries are starting to open up to free travel. And certainly in our own neighbourhood, we've seen New South Wales do that. And I just wanted to share these numbers with you from New South Wales in terms of what they're seeing, because there's a lot of concern, of course, as soon as you start to open up quarantine free, will you suddenly see a whole raft of COVID cases? And I think you can see from hopefully you can see that chart. It's probably a little bit small, but I'll share the slides afterwards. This is the New South Wales average daily case numbers on a 7-day average. And we can, since September, you can see the big drop as their population got vaccinated. And then they opened their borders up on the 1st of November. So they've had 45,000 travellers quarantine free, Aussies returning home into New South Wales since the 1st of November. So it's a good chunk of arrivals. Being able to, they just have a post-arrival test and then they're out into the public. So they haven't seen a huge spike in their numbers. They're still sitting at around 235 cases a day as their average. And that's with a 92% vaccination rate. So I think that's really positive news for us. As Scott alluded to, the big question underneath all of this is the Omicron and what that's going to mean. So these numbers presented today, of course, we can't sort of speculate what that's likely to mean, and it'll be a waiting game to see. Early signs seem to be that hospitalisation rates are too high. Right, let's see if I can change the slide. There we go. So just parking the New South Wales numbers, just looking at our own experience here for a minute. So these don't bear any relation to the New South Wales data. But our population vaccination rate is at 88%, so not too far behind New South Wales. Over the last 3 months, or actually since the beginning of the Auckland outbreak in August, we've looked at the numbers of how many people are actually bringing COVID across the border, and it's 6.7 per 1,000 is what we've seen in terms of the arrival numbers. So that's a 0.67% rate of introduction. In the rate of cases that go to hospital in New Zealand is down at 1.15% is what the data yesterday showed us from Ministry of Health. So if you put those two numbers together, the rate of actually getting into needing to go to hospital of someone coming from overseas needing to go to hospital is actually only 1 in 10,000. So there's a lot of concern about protecting our healthcare, and absolutely we need to. But I think that gives a sense of the risk from overseas is actually incredibly low of people coming into New Zealand and then needing to use our health system. So I think the government's talked about 20,000 Kiwis returning in relatively short order, 4 weeks or over a couple of months. So out of 20,000 travellers, that would see 2 cases needing to go to hospital. Based on the current numbers, it would be 134 cases would need to self-isolate with COVID. And over a 4-week period, that's compared to 2,293 cases going on in the wider community. So I think you can get the sense here in terms of the magnitude of how small the risk the border presents compared to just the general community transmission. It's really important, I think, that we understand that, but that in fact all of New Zealand understands that, because that's what's keeping people concerned about opening up. And I think that the facts just don't bear that out. So just wanted to share those with you. It's another really interesting data point that I love from, we closely watch Singapore, that their daily health announcements. Every day it says the same thing. Only 98.7% of their COVID cases, 98.7% of their COVID cases have no or mild symptoms, so not going anywhere near a hospital. New South Wales, their hospitalisation rate's at 0.3%, and of those, only 6% are double vaccinated. So very few double vaccinated people are going to hospital. So the whole risk position's changed enormously. Okay, that's enough sort of looking at the medical side. So more to talk about airlines. Ultimately, what the New Zealand border settings mean for current capacity, really, look, the airlines are really pleased, of course, about MIQ now essentially being mothballed and returning New Zealanders being able to go into self-isolation for 7 days. And what that will mean is that they can start to see a surge of bookings of Kiwis returning home. They'll be able to fill up their flights a lot more. They've been hovering around about the 20% mark on average, I think, in terms of how full they are. So that's really positive news. And as Wendy was talking about the 30th of April announcement, and really sorry to hear about the cancellations that occurred because of that, but that same uncertainty is playing in the minds of airlines, because they can't see a way to filling up their aircraft beyond that date. So the concern at the moment is that no one really knows the pool of New Zealanders that are looking to come back. It could be 30,000, could be 50,000, somewhere around those numbers. Once that pool's drained, then airlines need to get a view of who they're going to be putting on their aircraft if they're going to keep them here. And at the moment, they can't see that because it hasn't been clear as to which foreign nationals will be allowed in. We think the airlines have told me they think the outbound market from New Zealand will be very limited, as you'd understand, having to self-isolate at home for 7 days on return. So there will be business travel. There will be some people, determined to go and have a good overseas holiday, but it'll ultimately keep quite a lid on that. So what we've put out here on this slide is our call to government, and we've put this through to them and to the ministers, is airlines need to know when quarantine-free entry will be available, and getting a sense of the date that that's going to occur. They need to know by February. The airlines allocate aircraft very early in the piece, so they've already allocated aircraft for our winter. So it's unlikely we're going to see more aircraft over this period. But from October onwards, that starts to get locked in come February. So that's our message to government, is needing to understand exactly when quarantine-free travel can begin. And also, really by May, when we expect that pool of returning New Zealanders to have been drained, there has to be a clear path forward as to how airlines are going to fill their aircraft. We really want to see that open to foreign visitors without being cohorts or visa holders or international students, because the risk data bears out that it's safe to do so. and obviously all of your businesses really need to get this inflow of travellers as quickly as possible. So we think the science bears it out, and we think there's certainly a way for airlines to be able to bring those travellers in. Then from October, we really need consistent border settings around no self-isolation, really aligning ourselves with those border settings that we see in the rest of the world, be it Australia, North America, or Europe. Now, all of this, as the fine print says down the bottom, assumes that there's no more severe variant than Delta emerging. So we'll continue to watch Omicron on that basis. Right, just conscious of time. So
No, you're good.
yeah. Lastly, what I wanted to cover off, I think we're actually relatively positive that we will start to see a shift or more granular information come through from the government in terms of who will be allowed across the border and when. And we think if we continue the trends of the information that I've just showed, particularly in New South Wales, I think there's a lot of reason to be positive that the Australian market could get brought forward from 30th of April. And that's one thing that certainly we're cautiously optimistic about. Also, I think if we fast forward to the end of our summer holidays, so go to the end of January, there's going to be a very different picture which will have emerged. Because at that point, we will have had New Zealand essentially become one community risk level with COVID as Auckland's gone out. So what we'll learn there is how well our hospital system is fared. And I think with the numbers that we're seeing in New South Wales, who are a couple of months ahead of us, are very positive signs that our health system won't get overwhelmed. We'll have a 90% vaccinated population. And, as I said earlier, New South Wales is at 0.3%. So the government will really get that sense of, all right, how much risk is being presented to our health system. And then we'll have 3 months of data of quarantine-free arrivals into New South Wales and whether that's caused an uptick in cases or not. And again, I think what we're starting to see is that the vaccinated population is a game changer, and that the border is a very low risk overall. So takeaways for airlines are they absolutely want to keep flying here. I've been amazed. They've really stuck in here through thick and thin over this 18 months with staff members not working a lot of the time and on furlough. But they all tell me the same thing, which is, they've been flying to New Zealand for years. They really want to keep coming. They just need to be able to justify that business case and investment to their groups because they're looking over their shoulders at the Northern Hemisphere and seeing full aircraft and much better performance numbers. So I think we're well positioned for strong capacity growth next summer. But also even prior to that, as I said before, airlines are using about 20% of the current capacity. So there's 80% of room on our current flights coming in for growth, which is some pretty substantial numbers. So I think on that note, I'll leave it there and look forward to some questions at question time.
Great, thanks, Justin. Very interesting about the little risk profile that you've done with your numbers and in comparison, comparing it to New South Wales. May I just ask you a question? Have you shared this with ministers about that risk profile that you just shared with us?
Not this specific information, but we do know that they're looking closely at it. So the message we get back is that this position is understood. So they're closely watching it. The health officials that we've spoken to understand and agree with that general risk, that actually it's not the border that's presenting it, it's New Zealand transmission. So we are starting to see a shift, I think, in advice going through. And also had Professor Michael Baker, of course, a few weeks ago, put out the exact same message, which is great. So I think things are starting to turn.
Great. Oh, look, thanks so much. Appreciate it. Okay, and hello back to Renee, who is going to give us a little bit of some insights as to what TECNZ are doing and their view of the world as we begin to re-engage. So over to you. Thanks, Renee.
Kia ora, thanks, Linda. Fantastic to join you again. I don't have any slides either, so I'm just going to give a bit of an update. So I'll kick us off. E te tā, rā o rangatira mā, tēnā koutou, ko Renee aho no anua aho. Reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. So great, thank you very much for joining us. Thanks, Linda, for inviting me today to join. We've hosted a couple of webinars as well over the last couple of weeks, so some of you will have heard some of this information. But look, as we kick off, just want to acknowledge again you all in terms of the massive amount of work that you've had to do this year as we head towards what will hopefully be a bit of a break and a reset for you, but equally hope that you can start to see some business coming up on the horizon. Certainly fair to say that 2021, I think, unfortunately, I think we said this at the end of 2020, but 2021's probably been the most challenging year on record, I would argue, for tourism. But thank you so much for your continued support and work that we've done together as we try and navigate through these kind of uncertain times. Look, I want to give a bit of an overview of our focus and some context about our operating environment. I'm just going to cover off 3 areas, and again, also as per the other speakers, look forward to the Q&A at the time, so I'll go through it reasonably quickly. I'll just give a snapshot of our international strategy. I will give a bit of an update on latest research insights, both from people considering New Zealand and from New Zealanders, and just touch on aviation, although Justin's much more the expert in that area. I'm not going to cover off domestic. I know that's not the center of attention for this group. However, as always, feel free to contact me if you've got questions also after this webinar. So I'll start a little bit on international. Look, our focus is continuing efforts to keep New Zealand as a destination alive in people's planning and dreaming for the future. Continuing to try and grow brand awareness, and we move into the new year in February. Actually, we will start to boost investment in our key markets, and followed by a new global campaign later in the year as we look towards the summer of 22-23. The reason we're starting to boost next year is that February time period, as Justin touched on, is a key decision-making period for airlines. And not only do they need clarity, but they also want to see that there's a good pool of people that are interested in New Zealand. So we want to keep, that's one of the key reasons we've continued marketing also during this period, is to make sure that there's a good demand pool that the airlines can also see, that makes it, economically attractive for them to fly to New Zealand in the future. It's obviously becoming a massively competitive environment. Some of the other speakers have touched on that as well. It was competitive pre-COVID, but it's fair to say that it's going to be even more competitive now, and challenging for us because of where we are in the world, and also that other destinations are now opening up, right? So people can now purchase some competing destinations, and that's just the reality that we have to operate within and continue to fight hard to keep New Zealand on the radar and top of mind. Look, as we've touched on, and I think we've talked about as well from the previous speakers, is the recovery is expected to be gradual. There's not going to be an opening of the gates immediately, but it will take time to see that visitation again. And I echo Justin's points that I actually see some positive signs. I acknowledge hugely the challenges that continue, especially for you as ITOs, without having that border clarity, but I do see we're moving towards more positive signals. And look, I really recognize, I said this at the tech conference back in August, I believe, Linda. I think that was about the last time I was out of Auckland. I've been locked down ever since, but that we recognize absolutely the huge value of you as inbound tour operators in the value chain, and in particular, how you're going to help us recover as a sector coming out of this. So in our webinar that we held this week about international markets, I think many of you would have attended, we talked about some of the emerging trends, including the role of intermediaries, right? So pre-COVID, about half of travellers to New Zealand booked through a travel agent. In fact, in long haul markets, more like 73%. We think that proportion of travellers who will need to use an intermediary like yourselves, that will need an expert, is going to grow. Yeah. Right? Travel is going to become more difficult as people have to navigate what are the requirements for COVID. So your role will become even more important, and we're super conscious of that as we think about how we can support you in that. Consumers are going to want flexibility and assurance. Agents are going to help travellers. They're going to have to help remove complexity and kind of navigate through things that continue to change. I mean, take the last couple of weeks, right, with Omicron and borders open again and changes to settings. I think the travel trade is going to be an even more valued partner for travellers than pre-COVID. and as such, we'll be hungry for information and updates, and we're here to support you in getting that out. So we are going to run specific market update webinars next year to help you to understand what changes we are seeing offshore, and hopefully it complements the data and the insights that you yourself, Linda and Scott, are getting through TEC. In 2020 and 21, we have engaged with ITOs with a series of market updates focused on updates to the trade landscape, the context and the sentiment in market, and trying to really keep you as ITOs up to date on forward planning and strategies, and advising how you can get involved in our trade activity offshore. April this year, we put together a working group with TEC and 7 TEC selected ITOs to ensure that we collaborate in the most impactful and focused way to set up for success when the borders do start to open again next year. And key areas we identified to work together on: sharing data and communication, partnering in market and supply and operations, and that group is continuing to meet regularly. I can see, just a note, Linda, I can see you on the screen. I don't know if the others can see me or you, but I will keep rattling on. Anyway.
I can only see you.
Oh, okay, good. I must have a different setting. Look, and as part of that working group, we're also finalising at the moment what we've called our ITO COVID Recovery Support Program, catchy name. But it's, as I touched on at the TEC conference, is again recognising your importance to reconnecting to the world. We are really keen to see how we can support you particularly at attending third-party events alongside TECNZ to amplify our impact, plus supporting ITOs in reconnecting to their partners and accelerating the recovery ahead of the 22-23 summer season. So more details will be coming from our team about that in January, and Linda and Scott will certainly be in touch with you around. But that's really, we really want to support the ITOs, because you're crucial together with us in partnership to go, how can we make the best reconnecting to the world? You know, we have seen, just touch a little bit on a little bit of research as well. We have seen, as the rest of the world has started to open up, we have seen some decline in appeal for New Zealand, particularly in our top 6 markets as we track them, which is Australia, China, US, the UK, Germany and Japan. However, underneath that, so that's kind of the pool of people that find New Zealand appealing has gotten a little smaller. We're still talking about tens of millions of people, by the way. But within that, the group that has left those ones, preference for New Zealand has continued to grow. So it's a little bit of a bad news and a good news story. The pool has gotten slightly smaller because, quite frankly, people can now buy other places, but those that still find New Zealand appealing find it more appealing. So preference for New Zealand's continue to grow. We will continue to focus on those insights and promoting and finding those audiences to keep priming them for future travel. And certainly, I think when the government confirms how the borders are going to open, we do anticipate a lift in New Zealand's appeal. We will be able to track whether we've had any lift in appeal from the recent announcements at the end of November. So in the coming month or so, we should get some data to get some insights whether that's actually grown appeal a little bit, that there's some signals of border openings. I'll just carry on a little bit, just conscious of time as well. So yeah, as I said as well, guys, we're obviously going to boost our activity in February, our consumer marketing activity and ongoing our trade activity. And in the second half of next year, we will bring to life a new global campaign, anticipating that that's going to be the key period as we head into the summer of 22-23 also. And obviously, we will look at any and all opportunities in between now and then, how we could tactically support opportunities, even with the current settings, right? We recognize that with 7 days self-isolation, travel demand is going to be very low, but we are exploring, are there some tactical opportunities that we could support the sector in, even with those settings. So that's international research. We also continue to research amongst New Zealanders and get a sense of how are they feeling about the return of visitation. We see some good positive signs there. So in our recent domestic research, we see an improvement in sentiment. 82% of New Zealanders believing that tourism is good for New Zealand, and that's an improvement from the read prior to that. We also, many of you might have seen the research that wasn't commissioned by us, but Angus and Associates released at late November that said that 70% of New Zealanders were ready for the border to open now. So we are seeing that sentiment both from the benefits of tourism and also people being ready for international travel. So those, I think, are positive signs, as well as the points that Justin also made. And look, our focus will be continue. How do we maximize the value of high quality visitors as they're able to start traveling? So we will continue all of that work to keep priming those audiences. And probably just the last point I'll touch on, Linda, and I'll hand back to you, is, you know, obviously we are in strong partnership with Justin at Barnes, as well as especially Auckland and Christchurch airports. We recognise obviously a massive reduction in international aviation capacity, and we recognise that that has an impact, potential impact on New Zealand far beyond tourism, right? It's hugely important also for export, for import, for trade, for our ability to connect to the world, and for inbound tourism. So we are closely aligned and work in strong partnership with Justin and his team, as well as the airports, at any and all support that we can give for making sure New Zealand's an attractive destination for international carriers. And as well as that, obviously our number one aviation partner continues to be Air New Zealand. So we partner strongly with Catherine's team, both domestically and internationally, and we look forward to that returning in the future. So we'll continue our work and any support that we can give to the aviation sector to help us rebuild next year. So look, those are the key points I wanted to update. I'll hand back to you, Linda, and look forward to the Q&A.
Great, thanks, Renee. And I'm sure you are giving a lot of comfort to everyone to know that you guys have got a plan, you know, it's staged, that how much focus that you are putting on the role of the inbound in the future moving forward. And it's really good for us to hear from your offshore teams that they are confirming what we feel we're seeing, that the role of that inbound and the intermediary is going to be even more important moving forward, because people are going to want someone that has that natural duty of care, the ability to do contact tracing, which is what inbounds and intermediaries have always been able to do. And thanks for having our support. So for everyone, and you may not be aware, but Renee obviously is meeting very regularly with the Minister of Tourism, Stuart Nash, and he has our back, and that's really encouraging. Thank you, Renee.
Absolutely. Thank you, Linda.
And a nice little segue when you finished with Air New Zealand, because now we have Catherine here to share with us. We as the organisation, we've been keeping in contact regularly with Jenny Simpson, and then I've had a number of comms with Greg Foran as well, to also say that we have your back, Catherine, because we know how critical and important Air New Zealand is to our international recovery. So over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. And yeah, thanks, Renee. I'm sure we'll weave mine into some of the stuff that you've touched on as well. So kia ora, everyone. I know a lot of you may not have met me before. So as Linda said, I'm the Group General Manager for Air New Zealand, based here in Auckland, and delighted to be part of this panel today. So thank you for inviting me. It's great to be with like-minded organisations focused on getting ready to attract those international visitors back to New Zealand, because that's certainly the focus for us here at the moment. I've recently moved to New Zealand, so I was based in Sydney for 5 years prior to this, heading up Air New Zealand as the General Manager there for Australia. But prior to that, I've also worked for Air New Zealand in the UK and the US. So I've kind of seen a lot of those sort of offshore challenges. So segues quite nicely into my new role now in terms of attracting all those international markets back into New Zealand. So the role I've got now is responsible for sales. So all the offshore teams that some of you probably work with around the world report through to myself. And we're all really focused at the moment on that recovery of tourism in preparation for that Auckland border opening next year. So today I was just going to take you through a few key points from our side in terms of how we're approaching looking forward to next year. 2022 is actually shaping up to be a really exciting year for Air New Zealand. as we ramp up our capacity and prepare to relaunch into the key tourism markets and actually launch some new routes as well. The relaxing of the MIQ requirements to allow Kiwis to return home next year without needing to apply for MIQ is a good starting point. And the key focus for me and my international teams is getting ready so we can welcome international visitors back from our long-haul markets as soon as the border settings allow. Fortunately, because we've been operating cargo flights throughout the pandemic, Los Angeles, Tokyo, China, Korea, Taipei, and Hong Kong, these sort of air connections are already in place. And many of you know we've actually been opening that up to passenger services as well on those cargo flights. So it's actually relatively easy for us to rebuild capacity on these routes once the borders actually allow passengers in more freely. But in 2022, we are looking to rebuild our broader long-haul routes, starting with Vancouver and then progressively adding back our direct services to ports across Asia and North America. So by the end of 2022, we will have restored direct connections to our major long-haul tourism markets, including the USA, Canada, China, Hong Kong, Japan, Korea, Singapore, and Taipei. And also, you may be aware that we originally planned to launch direct services between Auckland and New York in October 2020. This is now back on the radar for late 2022. So very excited to be focusing on the launch of the New York services. And that will hopefully be a huge opportunity as well for tourism on the new direct route, because it will open up that large and wealthy market on the East Coast for potential visitors. And thanks, I guess, to our strong relationships with our alliance partners, customers can seamlessly connect onto Air New Zealand from that broader partner airline network. And that's really important for Air New Zealand and New Zealand in terms of that global connectivity. So one call out there would be UK Europe, because I know it's been mentioned by a few of you today. Although we don't have the direct service anymore from London to LA, we've got fantastic connections from all the UK Europe ports over those key gateways on the Asian and the USA ports. So we still very much see that as a key region for us. And then working with partners like Singapore Airlines, Cathay Pacific, United, and of course the broader Star Allowance piece that allows us to connect across the globe. In terms of Tourism New Zealand and our partnership with Tourism New Zealand, obviously it's always been super important for us in international markets. And more recently, we've worked together to stimulate the domestic tourism piece as well. So we're very conscious once those border settings change to allow international visitors, New Zealand will compete with destinations that are closer and already open to visit. Our collaboration with Tourism New Zealand will be more important than ever. And the way that New Zealand shows up in market as one team, together we feel we can make a bigger impact than working alone. So it also makes sense as the visitors that Renee and the team are targeting are the same visitors that we're looking to attract. And a big part of our international strategy is designing our future product to cater to premium leisure travellers to New Zealand. In 2023, our new Boeing 787 Dreamliners start to enter the fleet, and we've got a team currently designing the interiors of these new aircraft to provide an outstanding flying experience, specifically for our long-haul leisure customers. In terms of long-haul demand, alongside ramping up our network and operations, we're also rehiring people to ensure that we have the resource we need to build demand to travel to New Zealand and convert that demand into flight bookings. So since the border openings announcement, we saw a strong increase in sales, including a lift in sales out of North America, and particularly around the Black Friday, Cyber Monday weekend, where we ran retail sales in both North America and actually in Australia. We saw a real nice spike in bookings coming through. So we really feel this is a good sign for future demand as those border restrictions ease. We also saw an immediate demand for trans-Tasman travel following the recent announcement that fully vaccinated NZ citizens from Australia can enter from the 16th of January. Most of the demand post the announcement was for travel as soon as the borders opened. So we saw a real kind of surge for that January piece. And the booking behaviour suggests that it's mainly visiting friends and relatives, including New Zealanders travelling to Australia for Christmas and returning in January when the borders reopen. It's not until April, so probably end of April onwards, that we're seeing fully vaccinated Australians able to enter New Zealand, which is, I know, some time off, but we are seeing some strong demand from Australia region beyond that April date. And we're also looking forward to, obviously, when the Trans-Tasman border fully reopens for Kiwis and Aussies. A key aspect on our side for the recovery will be providing customers with the assurance that it's safe to travel and putting in place the systems to make it as seamless as possible. So to build confidence, from the 1st of February, international customers on our flights will be required to be fully vaccinated. So you've probably seen the announcements that we did around that. We're one of the airlines who's trialled the IATA Travel Pass, which will enable customers to create a digital health wallet to their e-passport. And once the travellers have been tested and or vaccinated, labs will securely send that data to the individual's app. It then checks requirements for travel against the data, and customers who meet these travel requirements will be given the green tick for travel. So it's going to make it a whole lot easier for travellers to keep track of their various requirements and provide a digital solution to the various health checks needed before travel. Starting from next week, the 14th of December, to travel domestically, we also require customers to either show proof that they're fully vaccinated or proof of a negative COVID test being taken 72 hours before travel. We've had overwhelmingly positive feedback from New Zealanders, with 85% of our loyalty base saying that they wanted us to do this. So to make it as seamless as possible, AirPoints members will be able to link their vaccine status to their AirPoints profile. This has actually gone live this morning, so I had a quick go myself before I joined this webinar. So for those that are AirPoints members, it's really easy just to link the two together. And then basically you can then just scan that as you would normally when you check in at the airport. So it makes it really easy to check in. And this is some of the same ways that we'll look to do it for international. We're one of the first airlines in the world to develop a digital solution to develop this, so it's really good to see that that's gone live today. And we've also provided customers with greater flexibility when travelling, because we're conscious as well that with all the uncertainties, people just want the extra layer of flexibility in case things change. And just quickly on domestic, it's really important, obviously, that New Zealanders feel confident to book and that they can travel safely and have a good summer season. We've seen a huge lift in demand for domestic leisure traveller with the announcement of the easing of the border next week. We've got more than 300,000 Kiwis booked to travel between the 15th to the 31st of December. And then our sales for January have really picked up as well. As a result of this, we've increased capacity on a number of our domestic routes and across the network, and we've got around 30% more capacity scheduled than last year across the summer. So that's really encouraging. The one challenge, of course, that we had was the short lead time to fill it. So particularly for travel to and from Auckland, with the announcement coming fairly late, but we have seen some good surge in bookings. We'll keep up our investment in marketing and encouraging Kiwis to travel to all of our 20 domestic destinations, and again work alongside TNZ to encourage New Zealanders not only to visit a new destination but also try some new experiences. And then last week, you probably heard that from the 31st of March, we announced that we will move to sell only activities and attractions that have been awarded the Qualmark endorsement on our dedicated activities site. Sustainable tourism is a priority for Air New Zealand, so supporting Qualmark and tourism businesses endorsed by Qualmark is a key focus. One way I guess we can do this is by promoting businesses on our Air New Zealand website that have achieved a Qualmark endorsement, and we'll be promoting activities in a video on our domestic jets this summer, so watch out for that. I know I'm certainly looking forward to getting out of Auckland next week and finally exploring a bit of New Zealand, having unfortunately been in lockdown in Sydney and then in Auckland. So heading over to Taupo with my family for the summer. So really looking forward to experiencing that. So in closing, I guess I'd just like to acknowledge the work of the Tourism Council operators and all members in providing our passengers and your guests outstanding experiences throughout New Zealand. And again, thank you again for all your support of Air New Zealand. We definitely look forward to working with you in 2022 and welcoming visitors back to New Zealand next year. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Catherine. And we really hope that you can escape Auckland and you can enjoy Taupo, and there will be some really lovely weather for you and the family. Really great to have that update direct from the source about the reopening of your connections with a lot of the offshore markets, Vancouver, Canada, US. Love the concept that or the idea that the New York route is, even though it didn't get off the ground, that's coming back, and then also through a lot of the Asian markets. So that's really encouraging. I am picking up from all our speakers that the border setting dates, the planning can only progress and move forward based on what the dates that we have at the moment. And it kind of does look like what we first interpreted with the original announcements, that really it's not going to be until the 1st of May that real visitors can come back to New Zealand, but they still have that 7-day self-isolation requirement at this point in time. So there's a few questions that have come through, but there is one for all of the panel, and it is along those lines. How confident for each panelist are you that government can still soften the restrictions in place? So I think maybe Renee, we'll go to you first, if that's all right.
Yeah, look, guys, I mean, I get as much information as you do in that regard. All we can do is adapt our plans to it. My sense of it is, I think from the announcement late November, and again, I caveat that I'm not closer to these conversations than you are, but my sense of what we saw on the 24th of November is that they won't reassess that, certainly not this side of February. But again, that's my outtake.
Okay, what about you, Justin?
Struggling with mute, you'd think I would have mastered it by now. Yeah, look, I'm cautiously optimistic, as I said. I think the data is bearing out that actually it's heading in a positive direction in terms of risk and that real concern of overwhelming hospitals. We're hopeful for February that we do get that information for the reasons I outlined, but I think by the end of January, as I said, I think we'll start to get a really good sense of how COVID is tracking and how Australia is tracking. So I'm pretty confident that we'll start to see government policy reflect that new data.
Yeah. Okay, all right, great, thanks. Catherine, any thoughts on that?
No, pretty similar to the comments. I mean, we obviously stay super close to this with our government affairs team, but we just looked at other places. Like New South Wales is a good example of where, if you remember when they announced initially opening up, it was with 7 days home isolation, and then within, I think, a week it got moved. So I think we're hopeful that we'll look to other destinations that have tried to do this and then realise that the demand pool is so small that we've got to relax that. So we're keeping everything crossed that there will be an announcement next year that home isolation will be dropped to allow more international visitors in.
Right, everything crossed, fingers crossed. Wendy and Scott, anything more to add?
I mean, the main thing I would say is what's happening already on this call is the collaboration and making sure that everyone's aligned in what we're all needing and wanting, and we're all singing from the same song sheet. That is going to put the most pressure or convincing in front of the government, and the people who are closer to it, like Renee and co, keep up the good work, because we are looking forward to some more change to help us out. But yeah, keep the cohesion going between all the different associations.
Yeah. And Scott, I can't see you on my screen, but I'm assuming you're sitting there in the background.
I'm still here somewhere.
There you are. Anything to add from you about?
Yeah, I endorse Wendy's comments. We need to keep the same message going back to government, and I'm encouraged by that the information that's been shared today from Justin and Renee around the very low risk associated with the border, which I think most of us in the travel industry and tourism industry kind of understand, but I think that information needs to be shared to the broader New Zealand population, and also some of those surveys around New Zealanders' acceptance of tourism and their desire to see the open borders again. Yeah. So I think it would be great if we can get some more of that information fed out to the public, because whilst the government may not openly admit it, I think they do watch the polls, and they do watch and listen to what the sentiment is out in the in the population. And I think that if we can get that information pushed out to media and other parties, we can hopefully get some more positive news in early 2022.
Yeah. Great, thank you. So I've got a couple of quick questions for some of the panelists. So Renee, for you, Jan has asked, just wanted a bit more clarity on where is Europe in the scheme of things with TECNZ's marketing activity?
Yeah, absolutely. I saw that question pop up, so I'm happy to pick that up. Look, I think our expectation is that post-COVID, and we're just using the data of pre-COVID, is that the big three markets, Australia, China, and the US, will over time again be the big significant contributors to the overall sector. But next in that, certainly in the top six, as I mentioned, you've got the UK is what was the fourth most significant market, and we would expect Germany to also return in that. So certainly, we have our office in London that remains the focus for Europe. We expect the challenge, I guess, will be is how the rebound of ultra long haul is going to happen in this current environment is pretty hard to predict. You're going to have to be a bit more resilient than normal, I think, to travel to the other end of the world in COVID time. So I don't have a prediction yet on how quickly that will recover, but certainly we would see Europe as remaining a focus for us in our marketing and trade activities.
Yeah. Great, thank you. A couple of quickies for Justin. What are your thoughts of the likelihood of higher fees or surcharges further down the line?
Yeah, great question. Look, that is an area of concern, and that's an area that Barnes really looks closely at, as do all of the international airlines. So we are seeing inklings of the international visitor levy potentially going up. So we've been talking to MB and Minister Nash about what that might mean. But equally, the problem we have is New Zealand's a little bit unique in that for all of our border services, customs, aviation security, biosecurity, that's actually paid on a user pays basis rather than just a big pool of funding like you pay in Australia. And what that means is when your users are down 98%, of course, the costs charge can only go up. So we're really concerned and working closely with Ministry of Transport and all of the agencies to make sure that we don't price ourselves out of the market. So it's definitely a concern, but we're hopeful that there'll be a kind of a cohesive policy from government to keep us still affordable for airlines to operate and for people to come visit.
Yeah, well, yeah, we've got everything crossed for you and for ourselves, particularly with the IVL fee. Minister Nash mentioned yesterday that in the new year, he'll announce what that increased fee will be from 35 to wherever. And we've also mentioned that to please be mindful that the airlines have to actually add that particular cost onto the price of a ticket.
Yeah.
All the airports.
Yeah. Well, for the travellers, that ends up on the ticket cost. So yeah, that's right.
So another one for you, Justin. This is from Steve. Out of the original 30 that were flying pre-COVID, the number of airlines, how many do you think by 2025 will return? Like, do you think within 2 years or 3 years we'll go from the current 10 to 20 to 30?
Yeah, great question, and one we're all wondering, and really hinges off Renee's comment just before about that uncertainty in the long haul market. I think, look, I've been really positively surprised in that, 26 of those 30 still have a direct presence in the New Zealand market. So that in itself paints a really positive picture. And what we're trying to make sure is we hang on to them through until next summer, when we can start to see some strong numbers come through. The challenge is once an airline pulls out, because they put a huge amount of investment into a market, and then to grow from 2 or 3 flights a week to daily, once they pull out, then they tend to take about 3 or 4 years to come back. So I think the name of the game is just to try and hang on to the ones that we have here as closely as we can, and then we shouldn't see too much of it.
Great. Catherine, a question for you from Karen. How many New Zealanders at the moment have booked outbound flights to Oz?
Yeah, we're seeing a fair bit of demand, not as much as coming the other way. I think it's mainly that VFR stuff again, though. So it's mainly what we're assuming is either Australians living here going back to see family and then okay to do the home isolation, or vice versa, like Kiwis going if they've got family over there. So particularly over that Christmas period when the January announcement came, we saw that people are travelling out that sort of week before Christmas and then coming back around that 16th of Jan going, it's okay to home isolate for a week, right, because I've kind of been working from home or in lockdown anyway. So we're sort of seeing those trends, not masses, but fair decent demand, I would say, but definitely not as much as coming the other way, which is good news.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And one for Wendy from Sharon. What's your sense of the travel distribution chain and with regards to its longevity? And do you think more New Zealand inbound companies involved in that chain might fall over? I guess that's a tricky one.
And not only that, there's a bit of a downer, unfortunately. I can't actually speak to the New Zealand side, but I can share. So we are, as a larger business, looking to acquire more businesses overseas, particularly in North America, and we have quite a few in the pipeline. The slightly disturbing pattern seems to be that they do, because I know you asked the question, Sharon, on the back of having to refund people. People are getting into trouble now because they've literally been using their retained customer funds to run their business, and now they're out of money. And that's a sad pattern that we do see happening. I don't have the oversight here in New Zealand of whether that's happening or not, but hopefully if people are in that situation, they are. And you know, the banks, a lot of you would have seen there was an article that said tourism isn't very popular with banks at the moment. So, you know, hopefully if anyone is in that position, they're reaching out for help from people like, you know, TECNZ or whatever association they're attached to, because it's a pretty crap situation to be in, but there are ways out. But yes, so no, I do think there is a pattern of that. I'm not aware of any in New Zealand, but Linda's probably more across that.
Thanks, Wendy. Yeah, and I can add that most of the inbounds, so pre-COVID, we had 71 inbounds. There are about 120 in New Zealand that I'm aware of. But of our 71, you know, we lost about 18. But they've gone into permanent hibernation and gone to get other jobs. So when the markets do come back, if they are available, if they're able to kick things back into gear with their offshore partners, I think there's certainly an intention. But at the moment, we've now got 62 inbound. So, you know, so we've lost a few, but over this past 12 months, we've picked up a few as well. But there's absolutely no doubt, and endorsed by Renee, the travel distribution chain is not going away. It's going to be even stronger and more important in the future. People can talk about digital capability, and everyone's going to go through to the booking.coms and OTAs. That's actually not what we're seeing. The trend is use a trusted source that knows how to deal with the aviation sector and has a duty of care. I'm just quickly looking here. Deepak has asked a question. Can we compile some of the questions asked today and get the best answers and send back out? We can do that, no problem at all. Tim has asked about, is the trade, you as our inbounds, are you aware of the big engagement and focus that RTOs are having with destination management and with their communities, and looking at social license and getting communities involved with positive messaging and the benefits of tourism and trying to mitigate or offset some of the concerns? Absolutely, our inbounds and the trade network are fully aware of this, and it's encouraging that this responsible attitude is or approach is actually unfolding, because for a general itinerary in New Zealand, of course, we send visitors to pretty much almost every region. So it's important we get that positive feedback from communities. And I think I've just saw a couple just sneak in there. We're almost ready with our timing. Matt, what have you said here? We need to share the low risk with the wider community. Perfect. And attach that in through the domestic sentiment. Can the various industry bodies? Yes, so as a result of the meeting yesterday that the Tourism Association Network group of associations had with the minister, there is a general agreement that we do want to look at trying to have a little bit of a campaign, not a little, a campaign to look at some education for communities and try and get that real buy-in with our social license as we move forward. I'm just seeing here. What have you said, Steve? Okay, I think that's pretty much it, everybody. I'm just going to wind up. Thank you, everybody, for attending today, and particularly to our panelists. And it is good that our members, as they're going off the chat box and finishing up, that you are feeling there's a level of optimism. We've still got a really long, difficult and challenging road ahead. There is still going to be a lot of uncertainty. There are lots of different organisations trying to work with the political parties and also with government to try to get that 7-day self-isolation requirement removed. As much as we'd like that removed before Christmas, I think we have to face realities that it may not happen until Q1, but we will certainly be keeping engaged with government so that we can put our best foot forward, demonstrate that we are ready. I think from a business planning point of view, it's probably best to prepare for the plan for the worst and hope for the best. At this point in time, it looks like it might not be till our spring that visitors might be able to come back, and hopefully with that self-isolation drop. So we are thinking of you all. We know it's going to be not easy going into Christmas, thinking that there could be another 4 or 5 months or possibly a few more before you start to get international visitors back through your doors. But yeah, we are certainly thinking of everybody. And we wish you a very meri kirihimeti. I'm just going to finish with a whakatauki, if that's all right, which I hope you feel is appropriate. Kia hora te mareno, kia whakapapapo namu te moana, kia tiriti, te karohirohi I mua I tō huarahi. May the calm be widespread, may the ocean glisten as greenstone, and may the shimmer of light ever dance across your pathway. Thank you, everybody, for all your support this year. I think Renee was right. We thought December 2020 was the toughest, roughest year we've ever had. But unfortunately, that hasn't been the case. Let's hope we get some more positive news in early 2022, and we can rebuild this fantastic industry that we all love. So thanks very much, everybody. Thanks, panelists. Wishing you all a very Merry Christmas and a relaxing New Year. So take care. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Louisa.